So feedback. How can we give good and effective feedback as managers? So there's two types of feedback. There's positive feedback, which is where you are saying something is good and that you want more of it. And generally speaking, it tends to be more readily and accurately perceived than negative feedback. But what we do need to be aware of is that negative feedback, people's brains respond to it in a much more intense way. So this is known as the bad is stronger than good principle. And you've probably all experienced it in, say if on social media, you put up a photo or something and you get heaps of positive comments on your post, and then you get one slightly negative comment, and that's the only comment that you remember. So our brains are kind of tuned in to notice negative feedback, things that are predictive of danger or making us feel like we're threatened in some kind of way. And so we have to be aware of that when we're providing feedback. And so if we do need to provide negative feedback in order to correct something that has gone wrong or improve someone's performance, we want to try and build that from a reliable evidence base. So we want to have credibility so that it's perceived as something that is objective information rather than your opinion or just that you don't like the person. So what are some ways we can use in order to give feedback effectively, both positive feedback and negative feedback? So first of all, what we want to do is focus on the specific behaviours of the person. So if you'd say to somebody, "Oh, great job, mate," that's a lovely thing to hear, but it's not very useful to the person because you've not actually told them what it is about what they were doing that was particularly useful or excellent. So you're much better off saying, "Hey, when you dealt with that customer, I know they're a really difficult person, and the way that you spoke to them so calmly really helped calm them down, and you did a great job with them. I'm really grateful, thank you," is much more specific and helps them understand what it was that they did that was particularly effective. And so then they'll continue to repeat that. Similarly, if there's something that they aren't doing so well, so let's say they were dealing with that difficult customer and they got really frustrated and told them to get nicked or something, you probably want to focus on, "I know that that customer is really frustrating. Let's try and find some ways that if you are confronted with that person again, you're not going to get frustrated because we need to maintain that relationship," or whatever it is. So you're focusing on the actual behaviors and the actions that they took and ways that they can change that to act in a better way. We also want to try and keep the feedback fairly impersonal. So a key way that we can do that is to focus on the impacts of their behaviours rather than the actual things they did. And the other thing that's really important is to focus on those impacts of the behaviours rather than anything to do with their character as a person. So for example, if we have that example again of someone being frustrated on the phone with a rude customer, what we don't want to say is something like, "Oh, geez, Sue," whatever their name is, you've got such a short temper," because that's not very useful to that person to hear that. And it's something that is about trying to make a judgment about their characteristics and who they are as a person, rather than focusing on the behaviours and the impacts of those behaviours. So again, rather than saying, "Geez, Sue, you've got such a short temper," you could say something like, "Look, I know this person's difficult, but in order to maintain this relationship, because they're a really important client, can I help you deal with your frustration when you talk to her so that this doesn't happen again. I hope you could see the point. We also want to keep the feedback goal oriented. So again, when we're thinking about the impacts of the behavior, what is our preferred impact if the goal is, if the feedback is negative, or if the feedback is positive, like, Sue, you did such a great job with that difficult client. I really love the way that you just maintain your cool, helped calm her down, and got the sale through, or whatever you say, that was good. And then you can tie it to something that's goal oriented in the business. So this is really going to help us achieve our sales figures next month, etc., etc. Similarly, on the converse, unfortunately, that client, we really need to maintain them, even though they're a difficult customer, because they're really essential to us achieving our revenues that we're aiming for this month. So we want to tie the behaviours that we're trying to encourage and elicit from our team member to something that is important to our team or the organisation in some way. We also want to make sure that our feedback is well timed. So there's little usefulness to somebody being told at their annual performance review that something they did 8 months ago wasn't great. That's probably going to just make them feel a bit resentful, and probably going to make them as well feel like there's some kind of harbored resentment towards them in terms of what happened that 8 months ago. So picking up on things all the time and making a habit of noticing when people do things well or not well. Obviously, you don't want to be in a situation where they feel like you're just watching them and luring at them all the time. But just that, making that habit of, oh, that was so good when you did this. That really helped us, move towards our goal of X. We're again, reinforcing what our goals are and tying the person's behavior and performance to those goals. And we're helping them calibrate their behavior by making that feedback well timed. Again, we can also help feed it forward if we can use the feedback to help them in a particular situation. So let's say we've got something they're about to do. We could say to them, hey, last time you were in a similar situation. It was really great when you did X, Y, and Z. And maybe this time you could try A and B, because that might be a bit more effective. So maybe give that a go this time. So you're using that feedback to feed forward into something that they're about to do. You also want to make sure that there is understanding in the feedback. So sometimes, particularly if you're delivering negative feedback, that people can feel confronted or threatened. So you want to make sure that they aren't getting emotional flooding, which is preventing them from actually understanding what you're saying. So this can happen if and maybe you've experienced it, where someone's telling you something that is fairly unpleasant, and it's almost like you stop listening because all you're feeling is just the overwhelm of the emotions that you are experiencing. So as a manager, we want to be trying to make sure that the message that we're trying to communicate is getting through to the person. Similarly, we don't want them to misinterpret negative feedback as good feedback. So years ago, there used to be this technique that, excuse the language, but it used to be recommended if you wanted to give someone negative feedback, you would deliver what was called a shit sandwich, which was the idea that you would take the bad news and sandwich it between good news. So you might say something like, hey, Sue, you're always such a good, oh, that's my Siri talking to me. You might say, hey, Sue, you're such a great team member. It would be really great, though, if we could work on the frustration you get in when you deal with this client, because you're just such a lovely person and I wouldn't want you to get the wrong idea. Right, so we've got this thing about the problem in the middle, which is they get frustrated with that client, and I've couched it between you're a really great team member and you're such a lovely person. And what can happen is, rather than walking away with the message, oh, I need to work on this particular thing, that's the bit in the middle, they just walk away thinking that you've given them a compliment about what a great team member they are and how lovely they are. So we've got to make sure that whatever it is that we're trying to communicate in the feedback is understandable by the person that we're delivering it to. And then, of course, we also want to direct any negative feedback towards behaviour that the person can actually control. So the example that they talk about in our textbook is that if somebody is late because they didn't set their alarm, that's something that they control. Whereas if they turn up late because their train broke down on the way into work, that's not something that they can control. You know, assuming they caught the train that they would normally catch, that would normally get them to work on time. If the circumstances are beyond their control, it's not necessarily fair and reasonable to give them feedback that is not within their control. All right, so that's our section on feedback. Hope you learned something useful there. And our next topic is on delegation.